Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Gear Effects. I'm Ryan Ballinger with Golf News Net. Thanks for checking us out once again. Pete Weber's with me. He's down in Atlanta with Cool Clubs. And this is our show, second episode, talking about golf performance, golf fitting, golf equipment, all the intersection of those things. In our first show, we kind of talked about why and when you get fit, Pete. But in this episode, you and I, we want to talk about just kind of starting at the beginning with basics. What's going on in the fitting, specifically around launch monitor numbers and TrackMan numbers, and just trying to understand what the bevy of data you see in a fitting and what you as the fitter are trying to figure out from that data. So we got a test example, we got a case example here for one of Pete's fittings. And why don't we just start with the base case, like who this person is and what you were trying to solve with them, and then we can kind of dig into the numbers a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having us on. It's been fun to do so far. And yeah, so the example we have here, this is a student of an instructor that I know here locally. Been struggling with height on the driver. In one way is like she was creating height on the driver, but in a way that was causing some severe issues. Mainly starting to create some contact issues. But honestly, the interesting thing is like she couldn't spin it enough. And the way the way the club was set up was that she had it's like a 9-degree M5 or something like that from TaylorMade that she had turned down to 7 degrees of loft. Now she swings it pretty good. I mean,
hold on. Why did she turn it down to 7 degrees? That was when you sent me the email about this test case. I was like, why 7 degrees?
I'm not quite sure why initially they did it, but I think it was, probably it's always a tough question, like chicken or the egg. Why did something happen and why did it get to where it was? But maybe they initially saw some numbers that maybe the spin rate was too high or the ball was going too high. And so they said, well, let's just take some loft off it and see if that helps. So there's, I sent Ryan some screenshots. He's got them there, but there's the initial ones that we put up. I normally like to get the player to get me 6 readings so that I can get a good standard deviation of everything that's happening, get some good consistency factors. It took us about 10 or 12 balls to get 6 because TrackMan's got a new feature in their software where if the spin rate is read outside of a certain range, it doesn't report it back. And so it was like just reporting way too low to where we weren't getting any back. So I had to wait till we actually got some decent numbers. And every time it did it, she had to mishit it to get enough spin rate for it to even report. So, but yeah, so like looking at the overall specs of the club, it was a 65-gram graphite design GP shaft. It's not a super low launching shaft, but it's not like a high launching shaft either. Frequencied out to about 6.5 frequency. And so we're talking about something that's probably 10 grams too heavy, probably a full flex too stiff. We're dealing with way too low loft. And so it just started to present some issues. And so, ultimately, like her instructor took one look at it, and when he got her to move the way he wanted her to, it was so low launching and so low spinning because she didn't mishit it really all that much, like top to bottom, but heel to toe maybe a little bit. But all of a sudden, these things are just 55 feet off the ground and just pull it, and not a very functional golf club necessarily. So they said, hey, let's try to get that addressed a little bit. So that's really kind of how that was the starting point of it.
You knew going into this fitting then that this is the main thing you're gonna try to correct out the gate is, all right, this thing's probably too low lofted. Now what do we do? Is that, how do you think about this? Like as a fitter, do you think step 1, step 2, step 3, or check off box 1, 2, and 3, and here's what we're trying to fix? Or
yeah, and a lot gets revealed to me. The first few balls that they hit, obviously I had some good information going into it. We had Spectre Club out. The instructor had kind of told me what we were dealing with. And I was seeing on the TrackMan numbers that what I was suspecting was happening to create height on the golf ball that she needed, and essentially she was like hitting up on it massively. Now the examples I sent you, like the first 6, it says 5.5 up. There was a couple in there where we didn't get a spin rate reading, where it was like 7 to 8.
She's
I mean, it was
turning
a
a
lot.
7-degree driver into a 12-degree driver.
Yeah, and well, I mean, again, just attack angle was just hitting up on it massively.
Right.
But yeah, so it was, and yes, there are players that hit up on it that much. You start to run into some windows of, what are the mishits going to look like, and some other things start to play up. To hit up on it that much and still try to be able to hit a draw. Well, now you're, because of the 3D dimensional aspect of a club path, now like the hula hoop or their golf swing has to be just kicked so far out to the right that I think you start possibly running into, well, in this case, you do run into contact point issues.
And so, just a quick point of clarification: when you're hitting it up 5 degrees, is that dynamic loft, and what is that relative to dynamic loft at how you're delivering that club at impact?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, technically, because they're not directly related, you can have someone dynamic loft, how much loft they're actually hitting it with. They can have, they can be hitting it level and no attack angle, and they'll launch it at 3/4 of their dynamic loft, so they can still launch it at whatever that would, 10.5 or whatever that would be. But then they can hit up on it 5. And with the same dynamic loft, that lowers their spin loft, which creates more ball speed, less spin rate. Wasn't really the case in this one that she had too low a spin loft, because she kept the difference between attack angle and dynamic loft the same.
Mm-hmm.
So her quote unquote spin loft remained the same.
All right. So what's spin loft then, for people who don't know? What's spin loft versus dynamic versus weighted?
Yeah. So what spin loft is, in a 2-dimensional sense, it's the difference between. So we always talk about like alligator jaws. So bottom part of it's your attack angle. Then you have your dynamic loft, how much loft you're actually hitting it with, and it's the difference between the two.
Okay.
Now it is a 3-dimensional number. So yeah, and and ultimately it's the reason why, if you had a driver and a sand wedge that were the same length, that the sand wedge would go shorter than the driver, because as this gets tighter, so less loft, ball speed goes up, spin rate comes down. As they stretch out, you've got ball speed goes down, spin rate goes up.
Okay.
So yeah, dynamic loft, how much loft you're hitting it with, it is a valuable number to look at. But it's funny you ask about spin loft, because if I had any recommendation about someone wanting to learn like the kingpin number on TrackMan, the number that absolutely rules everything and is the big determining factor, it is spin loft. That's the number that makes everything else possible. It's a one that you can go down so many rabbit holes, because what that spin, I mean, one example is like spin loft. That also determines how much the ball will curve for every 1 degree of face to path. So not only does it determine spin rate and ball speeds and and things like that, but also the curvature of the golf ball. If you don't have a TrackMan 4 that shows you impact location, if you start monitoring that number, you can start to see when someone hits it low on the face and high on the face. Like a dead giveaway, if you look at someone's spin rate, they hit 2 shots and one of them has a higher spin loft but a lower spin rate, they hit it higher on the club face. So there's just a ton about that number that is the absolute kingpin number of trying to pick everything out. So depending on the player, there's ranges that I want to kind of see that number in. When it gets to that curvature number, like creating curvature, the lower that number is, the more the ball curves offline, which is exactly why, like, a world long drive guy who's hitting up on at 8, and they're presenting, dynamic loft of 9 or 10, so there's only 2 degrees of spin loft, they're going to hit it an absolute mile,
Right.
but they only have to be fractionally off to get it off the grid. But they only got to get 1 out of 10 on the grid. So
Right.
it's a way different world for them. So there's a range depending on the club head speed for the player that I want to see that spin loft number in, because there is an area and a range you can be in where you can get a happy balance. So on centered strikes, you're going to see workable control, not lose control of the golf ball. It's still, maybe you sacrifice a little ball speed technically because it's not as low, but it's going to be a good mix of all worlds. You're going to have good launch numbers, good landing numbers, and you're going to be able to hopefully, control it a little bit easier. And it's really key to kind of, when you start looking at that, to understand where it was being struck on the face when you're reading that spin loft number. Because if, say, for example, someone hits it a little bit high on the club face, and so that spin loft number reads up. You look at what that shot produced, you can kind of backwards calculate to say, okay, if they hit it off the middle, is it still good? So it's, for me, I do look at the good shots, but I also want to see what happens on the bad, quote unquote, bad shots. So trying to say, okay, when you get that number right, the numbers on the miss hits do what they should. You don't get these goofy off the wall shots.
Is someone you're fitting, if they come in and say, all right, I hit one kind of ball, I hit a 3-yard draw, does that change how you care about that spin loft versus someone who, like me, says, hey, I like to work it both ways. I want to hit a high cut, I'd like to hit a mid-height draw. Does that mean something because there's a little bit more versatility I'm looking for?
Not necessarily. So if someone does say, hey, I play a little bit of a draw, generally because a negative face to path situation that should create a draw,
right,
can start to reduce spin loft a little bit.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure when they do hit that shot that it's not getting too low.
Okay.
They're still able to kind of maintain height on it.
Yeah.
And someone who, versus someone who fades it, I want to make sure it doesn't get too high. And then also when they go to try to hit a draw, make sure, so there's a range in there that sort of, it's a good middle point to say we've still got control, move the ball both ways, get acceptable landing angles when you move it both ways, and then see when you go to hit straight ball, it's still really good. So
yeah,
try and get it to work out, when they do hit their individual little shots.
And then spin loft for you talked about, you alluded to this earlier about spin loft for a slower swinging player ramping up to a higher swinging player. What are you looking for at the lower end? What are you looking for as you get to the higher end?
Yeah, so probably a little bit easier to start talking about like the PJ Tour, like the 120 mile an hour guys. I'm really looking in that maybe 10 to 12 range, depending on kind of what their attack angle could be. Someone who hits up on it, a little bit on their attack angle. So higher speed 10 to 12, so 105 and above, I'd say maybe club head speed. Now that maybe that 95 to 105, 12 to 14. We start getting below that average male amateur speed, start inching it up maybe a little bit more toward 15 spin loft. Because those players, when they start getting below that average male amateur, they need a little help just keeping the ball up in the air from kind of a spin rate standpoint.
Yeah.
So that's why you see a lot of like 12-degree drivers and 13-degree drivers in senior flex clubs. They just need that loft, to keep the ball spinning and keep it up in the air. So as the club head speed goes down, spin loft goes up a little bit.
So does the relationship you're looking for between speed and spin change depending on that swing speed? Like how much you're getting out of your swing if you go 85 miles per hour versus 110? Do you want more spin down at that lower end because it's just going to keep the ball in the air longer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's, because those club head speeds are, there's a couple things that are going to keep the ball in the air. It's going to be, ball speed, ultimately landing angle of the golf ball is created by your ball speed, your launch angle, and your spin rate. So if they're a slower club head speed player, they're not going to generate the ball speed to keep it up there. So through launch and through spin, we can help kind of counter that. And then conversely, on the upper end, obviously they create ball speed that can keep that ball airborne as significantly. And then it's about, okay, can I bring that launch angle and spin rate down so that the ball doesn't go too high, and keep it within control from there.
So in this person's case, the test example we're dealing with, where was she swinging at, and what are you trying that? So you're trying to control that spin loft at this point. Where was she coming at from a swing speed perspective?
Yeah, so I've got her before numbers up here on my screen. So 95 mile an hour club head speed, 143 ball speed. It's a 17-year-old girl. So I mean,
money strong. I mean, good swing.
Yeah, really strong and super talented player. So 150 smash factor, launching at 16.2, spinning at 2,400 on the ones we were able to get a spin rate on. Yeah, and so I'm just kind of reading them through the way the numbers I put them up on the screen. But spin axis of positive 7.8 degrees, so curving to the right.
Yep.
A height of 102 feet in the air, 235 carry, 257 estimated total. So creating a landing angle of, now you can talk to kind of anybody and say 2,400 RPMs a spin. I don't know, too many people would say that's too high a spin. I think that's a pretty
That's
reasonable.
what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. But she was creating a landing angle of 39.6. So in her club head speed, I want that landing angle hopefully between 30 and 35. In that range, she's going to be able to maximize run out for the given carry that she has on solid ones and miss hits. That's the big one. Miss hits, if I can still get in that 30 to 35 window, I'm going to maximize run out. So those are kind of the ball flight numbers. So she was up 5.5 degrees, out 3.2 degrees. Face to path, this is being interesting. We'll come back to this one real quick, but face to path of negative 4.9.
She's going way inside with the club head relative to her path out.
Yeah, club path in to out, but this is where, even if you don't have TrackMan 4, if you got TrackMan 3E, which doesn't show you contact point, on my screens I have spin axis set right above face to path. And this ties back into that spin loft number, being able to start to determine, okay, what's happening based off the numbers, where was it struck in the face? Dead giveaway, if you see a negative face to path with a positive spin axis, it's a heel strike.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, so rough estimate, maybe only about 3 dimples, but that's enough. That's enough to make a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
She's able to keep her smash factor up fairly high despite that strike because getting up on it so much. But 13.5 spin loft. And so when I look at those, like, okay, the way the math works on what her spin rate is, like she was mishitting it to get it there.
Right.
Like she was like dead giveaway.
She's good enough to compensate for an ill-fitting piece of equipment and still get a lot out of it.
Yeah, but she swings it to hit a draw, and she hit nothing but cuts.
Right.
But they were heel strike cuts. They weren't, they weren't actual true fades. They were just like banging off the heel, and there it goes off to the right.
Yeah.
So as I kind of went through it, and I put her information in our fitting software, and starts popping up recommendations, and really kind of screams back at me saying, you got to get her down into a 50-gram range. And the way I start to look at things when it comes to fitting is, golf clubs are bending 2 ways and then twisting at impact.
Right.
So you have lead deflection, you have droop. All things remaining the same, a lighter gram weight shaft is going to droop a little bit more.
Right.
My first inclination was like, okay, if I want to get her off the heel or less off the heel, let's keep her in the roughly the same gram weight head weight wise, but let's lighten the shaft up gram weight wise and see what happens. Almost immediately started to see a significant reduction in the heel strike. Got her to move it a little bit closer to the face. And so that was, for me, like goal number 1 is, can I get gram weight and head weight mix combo to where I'm starting to get the person off closer to the middle if possible. Because with every golf club, like you can be heel biased, but as soon as
Right.
you go one dimple too much toward the heel, it hooks. Or
Right.
same thing is, you get one dimple too close to the toe, it cuts. So trying to manage that, try to rein it in a little bit. And so once we started to see like, okay, can we get that contact point, and start to see things and start getting a little bit more off the middle, it starts to bring things down a little bit. And so let me pull this up real quick. Yeah, and so where did we end up at? Well, this was fairly quick. We end up a lot of times on fittings. If I feel like we've got the answer pretty quick, there's a lot of times where I'll say, okay, try this, and I don't know 100% like they're going to hit it like shit. But there's times I put something in someone's hands to confirm in my mind what I've been seeing, and to say this is the route I don't want to go. Usually, like within a couple balls, it's like obvious. So so we went into it. This was probably the third combination because we had to kind of do a little sorting out to trying to figure out what head weight really kind of worked better for her. So what we ended up in was a TSI 3 from Titleist. Got her back, put her at 9 degrees standard. Didn't take any loft off of it. 9 degrees standard. We got her so she started swinging it a little bit faster, 97.3. Created 146 ball speed, so still kept her smash factor like 150, 151 actually. 13.8 launch, so brought her launch down. Got her spin rate down to 2,000. Now her spin axis was negative 1.3, 243 carry. So we picked her up 8 yards of carry. Now, yeah, it's a direct relationship to the fact she swung it 2 miles an hour faster. That's part of it. But now instead of 257 estimated total, she was at 272. So now her landing angle, and this was 5 shots in a row, is at 33.6.
And now it's going to run.
So we lowered her peak height by about 20 feet, 83 feet in the air, but flattened it out. Now she felt comfortable with it to where she had enough loft to where she didn't have to try to hit up on it so much.
Right.
She was up 4. It's like, hey, it showed up here as a really workable range for her.
Yeah.
Now that did help shift her club path out to the right again because of the 3-dimensional aspect of it. But now, so her face to path was still negative 5.7, but now her spin axis and her face to path are both on the same side as 0. So the big thing was like with this setup was now that club's in a spot to me where when she goes to work on her game, she's not fighting it.
Yeah.
Now she can start. So, if she goes to start working on reducing her club path, I think that's like the next step to say, okay, you do that. She's going to start finding the middle, way more often.
Right. So I guess for a player like this, who's pretty good and is making good contact, how much was it hurting her club's performance or her performance with the driver that she was swinging up that much? Does it all come in the back end of how it's coming down? You're coming down higher at a higher angle, or is it a combination of just better performance because she's hitting more through than up?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is getting her into a place where, like, she can now just. There was something about how her delivery before that she was compensating for the club she had to deal with. So not only was it hurting her, distance wise, and it was massively killing her consistency with it as well. But directionally it was like, then this is a small sample size. I get this. It would be interesting to see like how much better her strokes gained throughout a season is with the new driver. But people hit a lot of golf balls when they come to see me, and I try to get as big of a data set as I can without having to do 200 drives, but so again, when I look at it, but I still that's why I like to go to that 5 to 6 shot range and try to get a good read on things. So like we look at her dispersion with the one she came in with, she averaged missing at 27 feet 9 inches right. Now the I'm looking at the dispersions, like her consistency of her circle was 31 feet 8 inches, which isn't bad. I try to get the size of the circle 30, roughly around there if I can.
Right.
Now she had a variance on her carry of ±7 yards, which I wouldn't want to try to go into tournament golf with that much of a range on. Hey, I could go 7 yards short, 7 yards too long. That's going to be a little bit too unpredictable.
Right.
We got, and again, this is 5 shots. This is a small sample size, but when I get her into that, she averaged 6 feet 10 inches right of the target line, so closer to the target. Then her plus minus is 5 feet 11 inches. Now, is 5 feet 11 inches sustainable over a round of golf for a season? Probably not.
No.
but that's it. Those were like the first 5 shots she hit with it. It was like, if you look at the graphic that I sent you, like there's one in there where it's a comparison of both of them. It's grotesque as how tight they are. But then we look at her carry, 243 plus minus 2 yards.
Yeah.
Again, small sample size, but
tighter, more predictable. That's what you.
Yes. Functional, predictable golf shots is the most important, obviously, what we're all trying to do.
Right.
But yeah, and so the club that she could hit some good ones with it. Don't get me wrong. She blasted a couple, but man, for me, it's like, you got to be able to do it over, like we talked about last time, you got to be able to do it over a series of shots.
Right.
And where she was at with the setup she had, the miss hits were going to be so severe and so penalizing that, take it to the game, make the bad shots better.
Right.
So yeah, it was an interesting. I had to dig a little bit last night when I was trying to dig through and find some examples, and I remember when I stumbled on that one, I was like, that was a pretty interesting one to me. Nothing's ever a layup, with this to me, but it's a case where when I first started doing fitting and first learned TrackMan, I don't know. I know for sure I would not have looked at the numbers the way I do look at them now.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some things I learned, that really, really did help in this case, and kind of helps me in other situations as well.
So I guess one piece of this I was thinking about is with a player that's good hitting this ball and trying to make a functional golf shot. Does that then free them up to maybe be a little bit more not experimental, but open up the repertoire a little bit and say, okay, because I know this I can hit this driver this way pretty tight. Now I might be able to try to hit more of a cut, or I might be able to try and take it lower or higher. Is that a natural part of this?
Yeah, I mean, and so like getting the player in the right range, gram weight wise, stiffness, torque, club head, to try to get all those things working in their favor is supremely important. The big reason is like, because when they do move to that point of trying to move the ball and do different things, if the fitting of the club is far enough off, they're automatically swimming upstream. They've got something on the club to try to overcome. Build the compensation in. Next thing you know, that compensation doesn't work. They try to hit a little stinger driver. Okay, great. Now you try to hit a stinger 3-wood. Maybe the 3-wood fits you good. The driver doesn't. Well, what works for the driver ain't going to work for the 3-wood.
Right.
So, that's absolutely it. Because it's to the naked eye, you might not see much of a difference when a tour pro tries to hit a fade versus a draw. Maybe you get, the more you've been around the game, the more you see a difference. But trying to predictably move it, and
right.
and say, hey, I want to move it the old 3-yard draw, like you were saying, but yeah, so trying to get them in the right range to help promote what they want to do, and definitely open them up to, hey, does it allow you to further your skills as well? Look at it like when I don't know, if your brake gets, on your car gets stuck, the car ain't going to perform as well as it needs to holding it back. And then it's also a problem if the brakes don't work at all.
Right.
So But yeah, it's just the so usually after I kind of say, okay, we've dialed in a really good combination here, I separate the data out and I'll tell the player, all right, start working the ball. Hit me fades, hit me draws. Tell me your start line, tell me your finish line. Does the club feel like it's letting you start it there
Yeah.
in those certain points? And that could be a thing where all of a sudden maybe we at that point they'll be like, okay, do we need to do any of the little settings, slider screws and minor adjustments at that point for kind of how they want to do it. So yeah, it's usually the kind of the last part of it is like, hey, we got a good combo. All right, try to hit me some different shots.
Because that's always the favorite part of the fittings that I do. I mean, I don't do them all the time, but when I'm on the customer side of things and do a fitting, it doesn't. I'm not that hard of a case in terms of trying to figure it out. The right answer, just got to marry the right shaft to the right head. It's not that hard. But the fun part is usually what you just described is, all right, now let's try to have some fun. Let's do some crazy stuff that maybe I wouldn't normally do. I mean, I like to hit a little draw or a big draw, depending, or straight ball. But if you try to get me to hit a fade and I start feeling confident that I could do it, then I feel like I've dialed it in. Do a lot of golfers feel that way, or are they just happy to be able to hit their shot and they're done?
Yeah, I got a little mix of it, I guess. The better player, they want their, like the tour pros I've worked with, they want their stock shot.
Right.
And then they'll say, okay, here's that 1 or 2 swings around where I'm gonna try to move the ball the opposite way and still feel comfortable with that. And the funny thing is, it's like a lot of times they'll hit one and it won't be. I'll look at the numbers. I'll be like, I kind of mishit that, and they'll be like, cool, I like it. So like that. Maybe that's just maybe how they move the ball.
Right.
Like someone who fades it, maybe they just try to toe it a little bit and it draws. I don't know if I would want to do that, but that could be part of it. But for most of your run of the mill golfers, they're like, I want to get it out there, get it in play. As they start to develop skill, they want to be able to move the ball a lot. But it's probably like one of the boilerplate points in the golf finisher right now is that drivers don't move as much as they used to. I heard some people refer to them as tennis rackets. You can whack it everywhere on the face and it just goes. So it's kind of transitioned away from, can I work the ball with the driver to the point where, okay, do my miss hits just go straight?
Right.
And are they, I remember like when Pro V1 first came out, I remember hearing people talking, tour pros talking about like, and that even before that, when like the title of professional ball came out, and some heavier weight graphite shafts, there was talk about how the transition for the PGA Tour players, instead of working the ball cuts fades, working the ball had transitioned from hitting it low, medium, or high.
Yeah.
Not really turning the ball left to right or right to left as much. So, back pins, send it in low. Front pins, send it in high. Don't really wear it, not saying that everybody did that, but there was a lot of talk about that. And they're like, hey, the golf ball is kind of making us do that. And it's only, I think, to a certain extent, only gone more that way. And so the amount of, when someone fades it, it's like, barely moves.
Right.
I mean, Bubba, obviously he slings it around there, but there, that's just there might be just a handful of guys that maybe try to move the ball as much as Bubba does.
Right.
But for the most part, it's pardon?
It could be done. Just
but the way I look at it, it's like it's such a the lower that ball, the less the ball spins. Now it goes from slight fade to freaking duck slice.
Right.
With a smaller amount of change. So, but yeah, it's I wouldn't say a lot. Once guys kind of feeling a groove, like they'll hit a handful and they're like, oh yeah, let me try to turn one over. Okay, still good. Let me try to fade one, still good. But a lot of people are just like, I just want to hit the damn thing hard.
The interesting thing that I feel like has run the arc of this conversation is that I would imagine most people who come in for a fitting, they think about those beginning very early, the end numbers. They think about the end goal in mind of, ball speed, smash factor, total carry, total projected distance. They probably think those 4 things or so. But for you to get there with them, you're thinking about stuff that's a couple more levels deep. So for the average person who comes in, what can they bring to the table if they're a little bit more educated that that maybe makes your job a little bit easier, dials in faster?
Yeah. So, the numbers I read off, I've got them on my screen in a certain way for a particular reason. I've got, there's 3 club delivery numbers I look at on every shot. There's other ones I'll go in and look at some different things on the back end, maybe if I want to confirm something in my mind. But attack angle, club path, and face to path. Those are the 3 biggies for me. And this really kind of came about with one of the first PGA Tour pros I got to work with. I dove back into the data and said, okay, what changed when things looked like they got better for him, or he really responded and started to see things work in the right direction. And I started to track these 3 numbers after that to say, okay, is this holding up with every type of player that I have that comes in? And so I look at attack angle, club path, and face to path. And I look at the reason I haven't hit 6 shots to get started with is that to get an accurate standard deviation, which is what the little numbers in the lower right-hand corner on TrackMan data tiles is. To get an accurate standard deviation, I think statistician will tell you that you need 6 data points or 6 samples, or 6 points to look at. So I want to see what happens over the course of 6 shots, because you can prove a lot to me in 6 shots. When I see when I see those 3 numbers and their averages are in kind of acceptable ranges. What I mean by acceptable is like there's ranges that I see that I'm like, there's a ton of functional golf shots that get hit when we're in this rough range.
Yeah.
And so if the averages are in those rough ranges, well, I jump down to look at the consistencies on it. What I've found, and this has held up about 95% of the time, is when attack angle and club path, when their plus minus, their variance is above 1.5, it is a technique or a physical issue. It is something to do with how they're moving the golf club and maybe even how their body is moving. But it might not be a club related issue. Now the face to path at 1, what I have found when that number is above 1.5, like in this case for this player, her face to path on her driver was plus minus 2.2. When it's above 1.5, it has almost 100% of the time been a fitting issue. There's some element of the fit that could be improved, but it could be anything. So it doesn't come down. Doesn't come down to. But then that's where I start to jump in and say, okay, what did I spec your club out at? What's the software saying recommendation wise? So is the software saying the shaft range should be a little bit different? In this case, it was. She needed to be lighter gram weight. Could it be grip size? That's a big one. Players with big hands, players with big old mitts. It is death to have a grip on the club that's too small. To the point where exactly. You can palm a basketball. You do not need a standard size grip. You got to go bigger.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and then now it's okay for the grip to be maybe slightly too big in my mind. It could be a little bit bigger.
You can take pressure off and maybe deliver it a little bit better or something like that.
Surface contact. How good am I going to be at steering my car if I'm just holding out these 2 fingers?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me get some surface contact on it. So like in this case, plus minus 2.2. Running through the software saying her gram weight's probably too heavy. It's a little bit too stiff. Move her down to the combo that worked. So if we run back through it, so attack angle, plus minus 0.7 on her driver. Club path, plus minus 1.3. Swinging it really well.
Yeah.
Face to path, 2.2. Move her to the combo we ended up in. Attack angle, plus minus 1.5. Cool. Club path, 1.0. Face to path, 0.8. So
Tighter.
ultimately that face to path is an indicator of, especially on a wood, it's going to be an indicator of contact point being really stable. And then where she's pointing the face is way more consistent. So those are some of the things. Now, there's been times where, like, I get person in the right range and like we start to see things working better, and I can stare down at that face to path number and see if the plus minus might still be a little bit higher than I want it. But that usually happens in cases where like they were so far off.
Yeah.
Like get in this range. It's going to it might take a week to sort it out to get used to it, but that can be a big part of it. I see that number with that face to path number varying when someone's lie angle on their irons isn't right.
Yeah.
Even there, then their contact point starts to vary. And they're being athletes, which I would never want to sit here and try to take someone's athleticism away from them. But man, if we can get the club to help them along the way, it'd be like Michael Jordan wearing shoes too small.
Right.
Those are the big three numbers. So when someone comes in to see me and I see that, if the average is, so like I've had a handful of people come in, I can't say a handful, I've had a lot of people come in where all of a sudden like club path is 12 degrees left.
Yeah.
Outside in. And I've stopped a lot of fittings right away saying, the thing I will do in that case is I'll be like, okay, based on your speed, are your clubs close? Okay, they are. You need a lesson.
Right.
The answer is not buying new clubs, because someone who's out to in or in to out 12, there's a certain amount where it would be Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Try to get something a little bit better there. That they would need to kind of, that's not where their best investment is made, in my opinion.